A fleet operation rarely changes because one major decision. More often than not, progress comes from recognizing what is no longer working and making deliberate changes over time. That idea connects many of the stories Government Fleet covered this month. Some looked at how agencies are bringing more structure to their operations. Others focused on preparing for severe weather, developing technicians, improving driver behavior, and making better use of fleet information. We'll begin in Dakota County, Minnesota, where Fleet Manager Kevin Shangan helped move the operation away from a reactive model. When he first joined the county, the fleet had limited centralized oversight. Departments largely controlled their own vehicles and budgets, while much of the maintenance work was focused on responding to immediate repair needs. It was that setup that made it difficult to plan beyond the next problem. But the county eventually centralized its fleet operation, and that transition gave the team greater control of how vehicles were being used across departments. Of course, centralization meant departments had to give up some control, so the change was not immediately popular, but it did allow the fleet to build a more consistent approach to budgeting and long-term cost management. It also created room for greater investment in employees. Training had previously been difficult to fund because available money was often redirected elsewhere. Under the centralized structure, they were able to establish a dedicated training budget and give employees more opportunities to continue their education. That connection between operational structure and employee development leads into another story we covered this month. We've spent a lot of time talking about the technician shortage, and much of that conversation has focused on hiring, but bringing someone through the door only solves the first part of that problem. The next question is whether that employee can see a future inside the organization or not. Technicians want to understand how their skills can grow and what advancement might look like. If those opportunities are unclear, employees may decide that the only way to move forward is to leave, unfortunately. But a development path does not need to be complicated. What matters is that employees understand what is expected at each stage and how additional skills can lead to greater responsibility. Training also needs to connect to the work technicians are being asked to perform. Vehicles continue to change, and a technician who does not receive current training can quickly feel as though the job is moving forward without them. That can create frustration for the employee. It can also create an operational problem when the fleet lacks the internal expertise needed to diagnose newer systems. That means development is more than an employee benefit. It's part of the fleet's ability to maintain its vehicles and preserve institutional knowledge. Mentorship can support that effect by giving newer technician access to the experience already inside the shop. Certifications can provide another marker of progress. The important part is showing employees that development is part of the job rather than something they must pursue entirely on their own. Clear advancement opportunities won't solve everything around a hiring challenge, but they can give technicians a stronger reason to stay. That leads into another story regarding fleet safety. So King Township in Ontario had already adopted telematics, but collecting driver data was not the final objective. The fleet needed that information to produce a measurable change in behavior. For the township, speeding carried a public dimension because municipal vehicles are visible throughout the community. When residents see a government vehicle being driven unsafely, they are not separating the driver from the organization. That vehicle represents the municipality. The township used its data to identify risky behavior and address it through a formal policy. Drivers were informed about how the system worked and why the information was being collected. Communication was really important here because if employees believe monitoring exists only to discipline them, they might resist the program or look for ways around it. When the purpose is clearly tied to safety, the data becomes part of a broader conversation about accountability. Here, the objective is not simply to generate another report. It's to help a driver recognize a pattern and correct it before that behavior continues to a crash. And that does require follow-through. A fleet can have detailed information about speeding or seatbelt use, but the information has little value if it remains on a dashboard. And that's the missing link between visibility and improvement. Technology can show what happened, but it's the organization that still has to decide what happens next. A similar issue can emerge when municipalities collect information across several departments. Our story on building a cross-department fleet data standard examined why collecting more data does not automatically make that data more useful. Departments may use the same term while assigning it different meanings. One group may classify utilization by mileage, while another considers engine hours. Even basic vehicle categories may be defined differently from one system to another. Those differences become a problem when fleet leaders try to compare performance or produce an organization-wide report. This is especially important for vocational assets. A utility vehicle may travel relatively few miles while spending much of its working life operating equipment at a job site. If the agency measures utilization only through the odometer, that vehicle could appear unnecessary even though it performs essential work. Technology can't resolve those disagreements on its own. Before systems are integrated, departments need to agree on what each field means and how assets will be categorized. It is detailed work, but it creates the foundation for more reliable decisions. When everyone is using the same definitions, fleet leaders can better evaluate utilization and support replacement requests with information that is easier for other departments to understand. Communication was also the focus of one of our recent videos. Fleet departments regularly need cooperation from people who do not work in fleet. That may include drivers who need to bring vehicles in for preventive maintenance or department leaders who have to respond to utilization concerns. If communication only happens when something goes wrong, the fleet is always starting the conversation from a difficult position. Some agencies have addressed this by establishing more regular contact with customer departments. Monthly reports can help department leaders spot underused vehicles before they continue consuming budget unnecessarily. Dedicated representatives can give employees a clear way to raise concerns without bypassing established leadership. The format matters less than the consistency, I would say. Regular communication helps departments understand why fleets policies exist and give fleet staff more context about those operational needs. It can also make difficult decisions a lot easier. A department might not want to give up an underused vehicle, but a report showing its ongoing costs might change the conversation from opinion to evidence. And that same principle can apply inside the garage. We also looked at how a facility can begin limiting an operation even when the people inside of it are doing everything they can. A garage designed for a smaller fleet may no longer provide enough room for current vehicles. Older layouts can make it harder to move work efficiently through the shop, and limited space can also affect how parts are stored or where technicians complete certain repairs. Those constraints have consequences beyond inconvenience. If a vehicle can't enter a bay or must wait for specialized work, downtime usually is going to increase. If technicians are working around the building rather than with it, productivity is usually going to suffer. A facility review should therefore begin with the work. Fleet leaders need to look at where jobs slow down and determine whether the budget is contributing to the delay. Now, that doesn't mean every problem requires a new garage. Some improvements may come from changing how existing space is used. But when the facility repeatedly interferes with the operation, fleet leaders need that data that can show decision makers what the limitation is costing. And while some operational risks build slowly, severe weather can cause an immediate pressure. We looked at storm readiness and many of the overlooked parts of emergency response, especially what happens after vehicles are damaged. So moving vehicles out of a flood-prone area may reduce risk, but agencies can still face broken glass or other damage from a major storm. At that point, recovery can be slowed by missing information and delays in the insurance process. One of the most useful steps takes place before the forecast becomes urgent. Fleet should, of course, confirm that vehicle identification information is accurate and that insurance records reflect the assets currently in service. And after a large storm, local repair capacity can fill quickly. So if the fleet begins the claims process with incomplete information, they may lose time while the repair provider determines what is needed. Pre-storm coordination can reduce that delay. And fleet staff should understand how claims will be filed and who will provide the required documentation. They should also know how repairs will be prioritized if several vehicles are damaged at once. The objective isn't to predict every outcome. The objective here is to remove avoidable questions before the fleet is operating under emergency conditions. Readiness can be easy to overestimate. An agency may have an emergency plan on file, but that plan needs to reflect the vehicles currently available and the people responsible for carrying it out. As we know, fleet's role often begins well before landfall. Vehicles may need to be fueled and moved. Assets supporting the response may require an accelerated maintenance check. And staff responsibilities may also shift as departments begin emergency operations. So what a lot of these stories boiled down to was that responsibility can feel technical from day to day, yet it does have a direct effect on the community. A properly maintained vehicle allows another department to complete its mission. When the fleet isn't working, the disruption rarely stays inside the garage. And my takeaway would be that better operations depend on structure, but structure only works when people understand their role in it. Data can identify a problem, but someone still has to act on it, and planning can reduce risk, but only when it's kept current. So whether a fleet is rebuilding its management model or preparing for the next storm, progress begins by looking honestly at how the operation works today. And that's it for July. You can find all these stories and conversations plus more on governmentfleet.com. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next month.